How many times have you had something to say and said nothing? How many opportunities walked right past you because you hesitated for just a moment too long? Let me tell you something. Life doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It rewards those who move. And today, I'm going to give you a simple rule, just 3 seconds, that can pull you out of invisibility and push you into a life where you are seen, heard, and remembered. Invisibility doesn't happen overnight. It's not something the world suddenly decides for you one day. It's built slowly, quietly, in the small moments you barely notice. Every time you choose silence over speaking, hesitation over action, comfort over courage, you take one more step back into the shadows. You start to blend into the background, not because you lack ability, but because you've trained yourself to stay unseen. And over time, the world simply responds to what you've been signaling all along. It doesn't ignore you out of cruelty. It mirrors the energy you put out. If you show up small, the world treats you small. The harsh truth is that many people wait to be recognized before they decide to step forward. They think, when I feel confident, then I'll speak, or when someone gives me a chance, then I'll prove myself. But that moment rarely comes. Recognition doesn't come first. Visibility does. You have to show yourself before the world can see you. Waiting for validation before taking action is like waiting for applause before stepping onto the stage. It doesn't work that way. The people who get noticed are not always the most talented. They are the ones willing to be seen, even when it's uncomfortable. There's a hidden comfort in being invisible. And that's why so many people stay there longer than they should. When you're not seen, you're not judged. When you're not heard, you're not criticized. It feels safe. But that safety comes at a cost. You miss opportunities. You lose your voice. You watch others move forward while you stay in the same place, wondering why things aren't changing. The truth is, invisibility protects you from failure, but it also blocks you from growth. And over time, that protection turns into a cage, one that you unknowingly lock yourself inside. What makes this even more dangerous is how easy it is to justify staying invisible. You tell yourself stories that sound reasonable. It's not the right time, I need to prepare more. I'm just not ready yet. But those are not facts. They're excuses disguised as logic. Because the reality is, readiness doesn't come before action, it comes from action. Every confident person you see today was once unsure, hesitant, and afraid. The difference is they didn't wait until those feelings disappeared. They moved anyway. They understood that stepping forward, even imperfectly, is the only way to grow into the person they wanted to become. The world operates on attention, and attention follows presence. If you're not present, if you're not speaking, contributing, engaging, you simply don't exist in the eyes of opportunity. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how talented you are, or how much potential you carry. Potential is invisible unless it's expressed. Think about it. How many ideas have stayed locked in your mind? How many times did you have something valuable to say, but chose to stay quiet? Those moments don't just disappear. They accumulate. And over time, they shape the way others perceive you, and more importantly, the way you perceive yourself. But here's the shift. The moment you realize that invisibility is not something forced on you, but something you've been participating in, everything changes. Because if it's a choice, it means you can choose differently. You can decide to speak even when your voice shakes. You can decide to step forward even when you feel unprepared. You can interrupt the pattern that's been holding you back. It won't feel natural at first. It won't feel comfortable, but it will be powerful. Because the second you begin to show up, even in small ways, you start rewriting the story. You stop waiting to be noticed, and you become impossible to ignore. The human brain is not built for success. It is built for survival. Every decision you make is filtered through an ancient system designed to keep you safe from danger, rejection, and uncertainty. The problem is that modern life doesn't operate on physical threats anymore, but your brain hasn't fully adapted. So when you try to speak up in a meeting, introduce yourself to someone new, or take a bold step, your brain reacts as if you are stepping into danger. It doesn't see opportunity, it sees risk. And in that moment, it does what it was trained to do. It slows you down. This slowdown doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't feel like a warning siren or a clear stop sign. Instead, it shows up as hesitation, a slight pause, a thought that says, maybe not now. Then another thought follows, what if I mess up? Then another, I should think about it more. This chain reaction happens in seconds, and most people mistake it for logic. But in reality, it's fear wearing the disguise of reasoning. The brain is not analyzing the situation. It is protecting its comfort zone. What makes this even more powerful is how quickly the mind builds stories to justify inaction. The moment you hesitate, your brain starts creating arguments against action. It reminds you of past mistakes, exaggerates possible failures, and invents scenarios where things go wrong. It doesn't matter if those scenarios are unlikely. It only matters that they feel possible. And once something feels possible in the mind, it starts to feel real. That's how fear grows. Not through reality, but through repetition of thought. This internal resistance is not a sign that you are incapable. In fact, it often shows up most strongly when something matters the most. The more important the action, the louder the hesitation. That's why speaking in front of a group feels harder than talking alone. That's why starting something new feels heavier than staying in routine. Your brain is not measuring your ability. It is measuring your exposure. Anything unfamiliar gets flagged as a threat, even if it could lead to growth, success, or transformation. The real trap is believing that you must wait until the fear disappears before you act. Many people assume confidence comes first and action comes later, but the truth is the opposite. Confidence is not a starting point. It is a result. It is built after repeated exposure to the very thing you fear. If you wait for your mind to feel ready, you will remain stuck in the same loop forever, because the mind is not designed to give you permission. It is designed to delay you. The only way to break this pattern is to interrupt it before it fully forms. The hesitation window is small, just a few seconds where the thought appears but has not yet taken control. If you act immediately in that moment, you bypass the brain's defense system entirely. But if you wait too long, the system activates fully and builds walls around your decision. That is why hesitation is so powerful. It is the gateway between action and avoidance. And most people don't realize they are standing at that gateway every single day, making silent decisions that shape the direction of their entire life. There is a very specific moment where everything in your life is decided, and it is not when you succeed or fail, but the few seconds right before you act. That moment is invisible to everyone else, but it defines everything. It is the gap between intention and action. The thought appears, the opportunity shows itself, the impulse is there, and then your mind begins to negotiate. Most people lose their power in that negotiation. The 3-second rule is about refusing to enter that negotiation at all. The mind does not need much time to talk you out of something. In fact, it works incredibly fast. Within seconds, it can generate doubt, create excuses, and build entire scenarios of failure that feel real enough to stop you. That is why hesitation is so dangerous. It is not passive, it is active. It is the mind constructing resistance in real time. The longer you stay in that space, the more convincing the resistance becomes. What starts as a simple thought like, I should speak, turns into, maybe I'll mess it up, and then into, it's better if I don't. All of that happens silently, almost automatically. The 3-second rule interrupts this process at its weakest point. It forces you to act before the mind fully organizes its defense. Think of it like cutting off a signal before it reaches full strength. If you move immediately, stand up, speak, decide, act, You bypass the mental system that is designed to keep you safe, but also keeps you stuck. You don't give fear enough time to form a complete argument. You don't allow hesitation to become identity. You simply move. This is not about eliminating fear. That is a misunderstanding many people fall into. Fear will still exist. Doubt will still appear. Uncertainty will still show up. The difference is that they no longer get permission to lead. The 3-second rule is not about becoming fearless. It is about becoming faster than fear. It shifts control from thought to action. And once action takes over, the emotional intensity of fear begins to dissolve because fear cannot survive motion. It thrives in stillness, in delay, in overthinking. Movement weakens it instantly. What makes this rule so powerful is that it applies everywhere in life. It is not limited to big decisions. It exists in the smallest daily moments that most people ignore. Speaking up when you normally stay silent, introducing yourself instead of waiting, starting a task instead of postponing it, saying yes before doubt builds, saying no before guilt takes over. These micro moments compound. Each time you act within that 3-second window, you are training your mind to stop resisting you. You are teaching yourself that action is immediate, not optional. Over time, something subtle but powerful begins to shift. You stop identifying as someone who hesitates. You stop living inside long internal debates. Your decisions become cleaner, faster, more direct. And more importantly, your life starts to move because action has momentum. The more you practice immediate response, the less energy it takes to act. What once felt difficult becomes automatic. What once required courage becomes routine. And what once kept you invisible begins to make you visible in every space you enter. Visibility is often misunderstood as something dramatic, like a viral moment, a major achievement, or a sudden breakthrough that puts someone in the spotlight overnight. But in reality, visibility is far more ordinary in its beginning. It is built quietly through small actions that most people overlook because they seem too insignificant to matter. The truth is, you don't become visible in one moment. You become visible in repeated moments where you decide to show up instead of stepping back. Every environment you enter is a stage in some form. A classroom, a workplace, a group discussion, even a casual conversation, all of these are spaces where presence is being measured, even if no one is consciously aware of it. And presence is not just about being physically there. It is about contributing, engaging, and participating. When you consistently choose silence, you slowly fade into the background, not because you are unimportant, but because you are not actively inserting yourself into the space. The world tends to respond to input, not potential. The power of small actions lies in their simplicity. You don't need to make bold declarations or perform extraordinary feats to begin being seen. Something as simple as speaking up once in a meeting, asking a question others are thinking but not saying, or sharing a perspective in a group setting can shift how people perceive you. These moments may feel minor to you, but they register strongly in the minds of others. Because most people are not paying attention to grand gestures. They are noticing consistency, participation, and presence. What makes small actions so powerful is that they compound. One small act of courage makes the next one slightly easier. The first time you speak up, your voice might feel uncertain. The second time, slightly more stable. By the 10th time, it begins to feel natural. This gradual shift is how identity changes. You don't wake up one day as a confident, visible person. You build that version of yourself through repeated exposure to uncomfortable but necessary actions. Each small step rewires how you see yourself and how others see you. There is also a psychological shift that happens externally. People begin to associate you with participation. They start expecting your input. They notice your consistency. And over time, your presence becomes familiar, which is one of the strongest forms of visibility. Familiarity creates recognition, and recognition creates influence. You don't need to dominate every space. You just need to be consistently present in it. Even minimal contribution, when repeated, builds a strong identity in the minds of others. But the most important change happens internally. Each small action weakens the belief that you are invisible. At first, stepping forward feels unnatural, almost forced. But as you repeat it, something begins to shift in your self-perception. You stop seeing yourself as someone who stays in the background and start seeing yourself as someone who participates. That internal shift is what truly transforms your behavior, because once your identity changes, your actions naturally follow. And once your actions change, your visibility becomes inevitable, not accidental. Rejection is one of the most misunderstood experiences in personal growth. Most people interpret rejection as a sign to stop, to pull back, or to question their worth. But in reality, rejection is not a verdict on your value. It is a signal that you have finally stepped into spaces where your presence actually matters. You cannot be rejected for something you never attempted. Silence protects you from rejection, but it also protects you from progress. The moment you begin to act, you enter a world where outcomes are no longer guaranteed, and that uncertainty is exactly where growth begins. When you live in avoidance, everything feels safe but stagnant. There are no failures, but there are also no wins. No criticism, but also no recognition. You remain in a neutral space where nothing challenges you, but nothing changes either. The illusion of safety convinces many people to stay there for years. But the cost is invisible at first. You don't notice what you're losing because nothing dramatic happens. Over time, however, you realize that comfort without risk slowly turns into invisibility without impact. Rejection, on the other hand, is evidence of motion. It means you have stepped outside the boundaries of familiarity and placed yourself in situations where outcomes are uncertain. Every no you receive is proof that you attempted something real. It is confirmation that you are no longer sitting on the sidelines. In a strange way, rejection is progress in disguise. It shows that you are participating in life instead of observing it from a distance. The emotional reaction to rejection often feels personal, but most of the time it is not. People reject ideas, timing, preferences, competition, or circumstances, not your entire identity. The mind, however, tends to internalize it as a reflection of self-worth. This is where many people lose momentum. They take a single outcome and turn it into a story about themselves. But successful people interpret rejection differently. They treat it as information, not identity. They understand that every no is simply a redirection, not a definition. What is often ignored is how rejection builds resilience. The first few rejections feel heavy because they are unfamiliar, but with repetition, the emotional weight begins to decrease. You realize that nothing catastrophic happens when someone says no. The world keeps moving, you keep moving, and slowly, fear loses its authority over your decisions. What once felt like a stop sign becomes a checkpoint. You learn to detach your ego from outcomes and focus instead on effort and repetition. Eventually, a shift occurs in how you perceive rejection altogether. Instead of seeing it as something to avoid, you begin to see it as something necessary. Because without rejection, there is no refinement. Without resistance, there is no growth. Every successful person has a long history of attempts that didn't work out, conversations that didn't go as planned, and opportunities that didn't materialize. The difference is not that they avoided rejection. It is that they kept moving through it. Over time, rejection stops being a barrier and becomes proof that you are finally playing the game at a level where outcomes actually matter. There is a silent pattern that keeps most people stuck, and it rarely looks dangerous at first. It shows up as waiting for confidence to arrive, waiting for the right moment, waiting for clearer direction, waiting for permission, validation, or certainty. On the surface, it feels responsible, like preparation, but underneath it is often just delay disguised as patience. And the longer you stay in that state, the more life moves forward without you actively participating in it. Waiting creates an illusion of progress. You feel like you are getting ready, but nothing actually changes. You think more, plan more, analyze more, but act less. And while you are waiting for perfect conditions, opportunities don't pause. They move. Conversations happen without you. Decisions are made without you. Doors open and close without your input. Life does not slow down to match your readiness. It continues at its own pace, indifferent to hesitation. What makes this pattern so powerful is how reasonable it feels in the moment. The mind is excellent at convincing you that delay is necessary. I just need more time. I should think it through again. I'll do it when I feel more prepared. These thoughts feel responsible, even wise. But in reality, they often become comfortable excuses that protect you from discomfort rather than guide you toward growth. Because action always carries uncertainty, and the mind naturally resists uncertainty. The turning point in any life does not usually come from a massive decision. It comes from a simple break in this waiting cycle, a moment where you stop negotiating with hesitation and start moving despite it. The shift is not about having everything figured out. It is about refusing to let uncertainty control your behavior. When you stop waiting for conditions to be perfect, you begin to realize that perfection was never the requirement. Participation was. Something subtle but powerful begins to happen when action replaces waiting. Your relationship with time changes. Instead of feeling like time is slipping away from you, you start using it. Instead of watching opportunities pass, you begin stepping into them. Even small actions create momentum, and momentum changes perception. What once felt overwhelming starts to feel manageable because you are no longer standing still. You are already in motion. Eventually, this creates a chain reaction in your life. One decision leads to another. One action builds confidence for the next. You stop identifying as someone who prepares endlessly and start identifying as someone who acts. And that identity shift is crucial because once you see yourself as a person of action, waiting no longer feels natural. It feels uncomfortable. At that point, the delay cycle begins to break on its own. Life changes not because you suddenly gain more information or become more capable, but because you stop postponing what you already know you should do. The moment waiting loses its control over you, progress begins to accelerate. Not because everything becomes easier, but because you finally stop standing still while life continues moving forward. The truth is simple, even if it doesn't feel easy. Nothing changes while you are waiting for permission to begin. The world doesn't reward those who stay ready in their minds. It responds to those who step forward with imperfect action. Every breakthrough you admire in others started the same way, a decision made in a moment of uncertainty, followed by movement before certainty ever arrived. You don't need a new identity to begin. You don't need a perfect plan, flawless timing, or absolute confidence. You only need to interrupt the cycle of hesitation long enough to take the first step, because once you move, something powerful happens. Life starts responding to you instead of passing you by. And in the end, visibility, opportunity, and progress all come down to the same thing, whether you chose to act when it would have been easier to wait.